Hey guys, Pete here. Today I'm going to talk about Sir Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning. Well, at least one of the Swords of the Morning. This is primarily history, so there's no real spoilers about current events. Although if you haven't watched Game of Thrones Season 6 yet, then this will kind of spoil that. So with the Season 6 DVDs, they added a history and lore about Arthur Dayne, which doesn't really bring any new information, but it's kind of odd that they put it in there. I mean, he did play a part in Bran's flashbacks of the Tower of Joy, as he was the dual-wielding Kingsguard that was at the tower that Ned and Hallen eventually got the better of. So I guess you could say that his backstory was important for that reason, so that you could learn who that guy was that was guarding Lyanna Stark at the Tower of Joy. But I think it's likely that there's more to it than that. Which I should mention is totally weird because Sir Arthur Dayne only ever wielded Dawn. I mean, he's got the coolest sword in Westeros, so he's never been said to have wielded two swords at the same time. So that's a show-only kind of thing there. So the history and lore goes over his story, which I'll recap really quickly. The one thing about Arthur Dayne is that, you know, he's not really mentioned that much in the books, but he's always mentioned with really high regard. Bran recalls that Ned said that Arthur Dayne was the finest knight he ever saw, and that he would have killed him if it wasn't for Hallen Reed. And this new clip is actually narrated by the actor who played the young Ned Stark, so he tells the exact same story. First, he retells the legend of how Starfall, the ancestral seat of House Dayne, was founded. The legend is that the first Dayne found a magic stone that fell from the sky, like a shooting star, and that's where they actually built Starfall. And he mentions that this is a fantastic story, but that the House Dayne has a relic to prove it, which is the ancestral blade Dawn. The quick story of Dawn is that it's a really old sword that was forged from the meteorite, and it has a lot of magical properties. It predates Valyrian steel by quite a while, but it has the same sort of properties, although in the books it looks a lot different. It's actually milk white, they say. And in the TV show, obviously, they went away from that a little bit. But it's a magical sword. It's a famous sword. And one of the many things that is curious about House Dayne is that it's not passed from father to his oldest son like most families do with their ancestral blades. Instead, there's someone who's called the Sword of the Morning when someone emerges to be a great warrior. If no one does, then the sword stays on the mantle and no one uses it. So Dawn's a whole nother subject all by itself, and we'll get into that more, but for now let's continue on with Arthur Dayne's story. So young Ned tells us that about a story whenever, while serving on the Kingsguard for King Aerys, Sir Arthur Dayne befriended the small folk so that he could track down and defeat the Kingswood Brotherhood. This was a band of people who was sort of going around and terrorizing the countryside, and no one could stop them because the small folk were basically protecting them. By using diplomacy and talking to them and finding out what they needed, he was able to track down the Kingswood Brotherhood's leader, the Smiling Knight, who he defeated in single combat. They don't mention this in the history and lore, but at that same time he did knight Jaime Lannister, who we know obviously became a sworn brother of the Kingsguard down the road. Young Ned goes from the story of the Smiling Knight to talking about how, even though they fought on opposite sides, he respected him. He goes on to say that he wanted to be him, that all boys wanted to be him at that time, and that ultimately he killed him. We see a shot of Ned holding Dawn soaked in blood, and we see Arthur on the ground. We had more of this in the actual flashback scene with Bran earlier, where we see Ned pick up Dawn and slice him. And really up until this point, the details about Sir Arthur Dayne's death weren't really known. When Ned remembers it, he doesn't really talk about how he died. He just tells Bran that Arthur Dayne would have killed him if it wasn't for Hallen Reed. So if we take what happened in the show and in this history and lore clip to be what will happen in the books, then we can say for sure that the theory about Arthur Dayne still being alive wouldn't be right. This is actually a theory that there's a couple versions of it around, but because it basically boils down to the idea that because it never says how he died, that perhaps something happened where Ned and Hallen got the upper hand. And therefore, Arthur Dayne decided to fake his own death, more or less. He would have to give up the sword, go into hiding. Ned and Hallen would have to build the burial site to make it look like he was dead, and then return Dawn to Starfall to cover the whole thing up. So those theories were around for a long time, and I think this kind of clears it up, at least for what we can expect to see in the television show. But one of the reasons why these theories were so popular is because there just isn't that much information about Dayne in the books. I mean, he's obviously an important character who's mentioned, but mysterious just the same. I mean, his whole family sort of is, if you think about it. Now, the show never did the young Edric Dayne, who goes by Ned. In the books, he was in the Brotherhood Without Banners, and Arya actually met him on her way through the Riverlands. He's currently the head of House Dayne, Lord of House Dayne, but he's also kind of a mystery as well. Like, no one knows what his father's name was. He was Arthur Dayne's older brother, so, you know, it was his Ashara and Illyria were his sisters, but nobody knows who he was. It's also kind of odd that his name is Edric, but he goes by Ned, which everyone knows is the name of the man who's slain his uncle, who was the Sword of the Morning, the warrior of their house. So that's a bit odd. So he was in the books. He traveled with Beric Dondarrion because Beric was married to his aunt, Illyria, who I just mentioned. And he followed them around until Beric actually died, the Brotherhood Without Banners, for the last time. But like I said, the show never had him as a character. But like I said, it's really strange with these guys because they're mentioned as an important thing, but I can't even think of anyone who's ever actually seen Starfall in the books. Like, it's there, but as far as at least the point of view characters, I can't think of any of them that have actually visited Starfall. It is in Dorne, though. I mean, so there are lots of places in the books that we've never been to, but other than Ned going there before the series actually started after Robert's Rebellion, nobody's been there. So that's what makes Sir Arthur Dayne such a mysterious character and an interesting character at the same time. We have a lot of accounts of things that he did or the way that he was. We have a lot of important and interesting connections. He was Rhaegar Targaryen's best friend. Sir Barristan knew him from being in the Kingsguard. He trained Sir Jaime Lannister. He stayed behind at the Tower of Joy to protect Lyanna Stark until Ned and Hallen killed him. In the History and Lore clip, young Ned says that he respected him to the end, that he knew that he wouldn't follow along with Rhaegar taking Lyanna if he wasn't just following his vows. So on top of being a great warrior, he is considered to be this true knight, you know, who does what he's supposed to do and is chivalrous and so on and so forth. So what is this character's purpose? If he's not still alive, which I don't think he is, those theories are out the window. What is up with these mysterious Danes? You know, their ancestral seat is at the place where this meteorite supposedly crashed to the ground. Nobody's really gone there in any of the books. Ashara Dayne is this, you know, magically beautiful, mysterious character that pops up at the tourney of Harrenhal, only to commit suicide off screen later on by jumping out of a tower. Of course, there's theories there where she had slept with Ned or possibly Brandon. I'm kind of in the Ned camp, but supposedly one of the Starks impregnated her. Then we got the leader of the house now, the Lord of the House, whose father was just the only insignificant sibling out of the whole bunch. You know, the one that nobody even knows his name because he didn't do anything except for father this kid. Sir Arthur Dayne is this legendary knight who makes his last stand protecting the heir of his king, who he's sworn to serve, but was also his best friend, who he wasn't with at the Battle of the Trident because he followed orders. You know, the whole thing, the whole Robert's Rebellion may have gone differently if Rhaegar hadn't made the decision to put his 3 strongest Kingsguard at the Tower of Joy to protect Lyanna. So, you know, they're woven into the story, and it makes you wonder why they're there and what is the purpose that we haven't really figured out yet. And I think it will eventually all come down to Dawn, their house ancestral blade. When asked about it, George R.R. Martin has said that it's just sitting in Starfall waiting for the next Sword of the Morning to come along. That would seem to indicate, at least at this point, that Edric Dayne, young Ned, is not going to be the Sword of the Morning, or he's not ready to be the Sword of the Morning yet. But I mean, there is that possibility. He did leave, the Brotherhood Without Banners once Lady Stoneheart took over. So he may have gone back, and we might find out more about him there. But, it just seems like an open-ended mystery that there has to be a greater purpose. It's sort of on the same lines as Howland Reed or, the Green Men and the Isle of Faces, which I've done videos about recently. There's no reason to inject them into the story if you're not going to use them for something big. And that is the one thing that really stands out from the history and lore, is it's just like they really emphasize the Blade Dawn and how magical and important it is. But just like I said, George says it's sitting on the mantle, and they show it there actually twice in the history and lore clip, which makes you even think about it more. Like they're almost trolling us with it. Like, this is important, but we're not going to tell you why. Which the obvious conclusion that most people theorize is that it's somehow going to be Lightbringer, which I mean, that's definitely a whole nother video. So, I'm not going to get into that here, but it is the oldest sword that we know of that has this kind of power, like, that's as strong as Valyrian steel. And then the TV show did that little putting it at the end of the bed and sort of framing the shot with it whenever young Ned goes to Lyanna's side and when, at her deathbed. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. I will probably do a video about Dawn and, all the theories that surround that. I mean, it's a pretty done to death kind of thing, but it's interesting. If you don't know about it, let me know, and I'll, definitely work on that video in the near future. Please like the video if you enjoyed it, and tell me if you have any Sir Arthur Dayne theories that I didn't think about in the comments. The book giveaway is still going on, and we're getting close, so make sure you subscribe and leave a comment. When I hit 28,000 subscribers, I will send one of the commenters from one of the videos that's included in this giveaway a copy of A Game of Thrones 20th Anniversary Edition, the illustrated one that just came out recently. So make sure, like I said, you subscribe and like and comment on the video for your chance to win. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.